One finger, one whole step, and one string can open up a whole new world of endless possibilities for guitarists. If you've heard of drop D tuning, you may be in one of several different camps. You may have started out in E standard tuning and are starting to see that a bunch of the songs you want to learn are in drop D tuning. You could also be more familiar with drop D tuning and use it all the time, but you might be wondering how the tuning is useful in writing original riffs, songs, and even solos. Don't worry, because regardless of if you're a beginner or a more advanced player, I'm going to cover the whole range of drop D tuning so that you know how to weaponize it for sonic warfare. And stay tuned, because I'll be giving away a super sweet bonus that'll go along with this material. So grab your axe, take a seat, and let's get ready to rock. So first we have to actually establish the tuning and what it is, what it looks like, what it sounds like, and how to get there. It doesn't take long, so we can get through this pretty quickly. So you only need to adjust one string, that being what you're probably used to knowing as the low E string. And what you do is you drop that string down, you tune it to a lower pitch that's one whole step lower than where it's currently at, assuming you're actually tuned to E standard. So all you need to do is plug into a tuner if you've got one, or if you really want to challenge yourself, you can use your ear and match it to the current D string. And make sure that the lower E string turns into a D string, a lower D string, and resonates with that higher pitched D string. So by doing this, it's almost like we add two whole extra frets to our guitar. Because in standard tuning, we'd be right here on fret 2 if we want to just play, an E power chord. But now we have E flat and D. And this does not end up taking away any of the higher notes up here, because if you're new to this, you might be quick to think like, oh, but what if I want to play like some of the higher notes up here on the low E string? Well, you don't really need to worry about that, because the notes on the other strings sort of compensate for those lost notes, since you can find the same exact notes on different areas of the guitar. For example, we have this B note here on the dropped D string, but that same exact note also appears on fret 2 of the A string. Before we continue, I do want to give you something extra to take away with you from this lesson. It's my Elite Tones cheat sheet, and it's a completely free resource that's designed to help players dial in awesome sounding amp tones. So if you're struggling to get your amp to sound good, this is definitely the tool for you. It also includes a bunch of extra tone options that you could start using right away, because it has direct links to some of my favorite free amp sim plugins. It even shows you how to make those digital amp simulators sound like authentic physical amplifiers. I put a link for this cheat sheet in the description for you, and you can also find it at zachsharguitar.com and download it there for free. So to dive deeper into this fun and exciting tuning, I want to share with you some riffing and songwriting considerations you want to keep in mind, and along the way kind of share with you why this tuning is so appealing to so many players. So for example, the power chord is suddenly a lot easier to play with. And when you're used to playing that with multiple fingers on your fretting hand, at least 2, sometimes even 3, we can now play that same chord with just 1 finger by barring the lowest 2 or 3 strings. And this ends up making a lot of quicker power chord moves, starting with the lower drop D string, a lot easier to play. And that's why this is so appealing to a lot of the rock and really a lot of the new metal players, at least drop tunings in general. One thing you'll notice is that your open chord choices might start to change. So instead of focusing on chords that rely on what you're used to being your low E string, and since it's now your drop D string, you might want to forget about those chords and focus more on ones that omit that string entirely, such as the A minor chord, for example, and even the D chord. And actually, in the case of the D chord, you can expand it more in drop D tuning. You don't actually have to omit the lowered D string at all. And actually, you can use that and the A string, all the strings, since you're just adding notes that already exist in the chord anyway. Because we're used to playing that chord with a D and an A note. So we're just going to add a D and an A note with our lowest tuned strings. If you're used to standard tuning, you'll probably notice that switching to drop D tuning or just any drop tuning could change your default writing position. So for me, I'm kind of used to hovering around the 7th position since I've got an E there and I'm used to having a lower E string, so it can give me a lot of wiggle room to go down or up on the neck since I'm kind of centered in that position. And I think a lot of this has to do with my personal gravitation towards like metalcore inspired writing. But you'll find if you're similar to me in this respect that you instead probably hover more around the 5th fret, which makes sense since it's a whole step lower than what we're used to, just like the tuning itself is one whole step lower than what we're used to. And while it is an adjustment to have to get used to the tuning altogether, it's not a bad thing since it can inspire the flavors of underused or unexplored keys. And this idea also applies to soloing. So now we could transition into more advanced soloing considerations. And with soloing, while we tend to rely more on the higher pitched strings, a lot of players base their soloing on the root note of a scale, and many end up referencing the low E string as they do this. The problem with that, though, is that this mindset demands the player shift up and down 2 frets when transitioning from the A string to that drop D string, or vice versa. And I'll show you what that looks like in action using a couple of really popular scales used in rock and metal soloing. First, I'm going to show you the issues that you'll run into along the way, and then I'll show you how to get around those issues. So, let's take the minor scale, for example, a classic scale that we could do a lot of things with in our solo writing. So in drop D tuning, this is what that scale looks like, okay? We're starting on fret 12, and then we're playing frets 14 and 15. Then we have to shift down to fret 10 of the A string, and then play fret 12 and 13. And then just continue the scale while keeping that shift in mind from the start. However, we don't have to rely on 6-string versions of scales altogether. Instead of starting that scale on fret 12 of the drop D string, we can just start on fret 5 of the A string. See, you don't have to move at all when you start that scale. All right, what about the pentatonic scale? Okay, so if you're familiar with the pentatonic scale, you'll know that 99.9% of players stick to that same form. The form that I refer to as form 1. And in the key of A minor, this is what that looks like. We're going to be starting on the 7th fret, and then we're going to hit fret 10 on that drop D string. Then we have to shift down a whole step and play the 5th fret of the A string and then hit fret 7 and then continue the scale from there. But this is not the only way to play the pentatonic scale. In fact, there are several different options we can choose from. And in this case, I'm going to actually pull from the 4th form of the pentatonic scale. And you'll find that as we do this, it'll start to look a lot like form 1. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on how to play this scale. I've got tabs on the screen for the minor scales, but I want to break this one down a little bit more for you. So we're going to hit fret 12 on the A string and then follow that up with fret 15. Then we're going to hit fret 12 and 14 on the D string, the higher pitched D string. Same frets again, but on the G string, we're going to hit 12 and 14 there. Then we're going to hit frets 13 and 15 on the B string. And then we're going to wrap it up with frets 12 and 15 on the high E string. Despite a one-step difference on one single string, drop D tuning has many different factors to account for. It completely changes the way we look at, think about, and play the guitar. Our approach shifts when we have to consider chords as well as how to be intentional with riff writing and soloing. Drop D is certainly a fun tuning to experiment with since it can inspire ideas that you may not have initially thought about before. It also sounds heavier, at least once you first try it, but I caution you against relying on lower tunings to write something heavy. In fact, I have a whole separate video on how to make E standard tuning sound massively heavy, so feel free to check that out for even more ideas to add to your arsenal. And don't forget to download my free Elite Tones cheat sheet if you have not done so already. It gives you my best tips on how to dial in killer amp tones, and it even shows you how to make digital amp sims sound like authentic physical amplifiers. Plus, there's some direct links in there to some of my favorite free amp sims. So just click the link in the description or go to ZachSharGuitar.com and download this awesome free tool. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Zach with Zach Shar Guitar. God bless, and I will see you in the next one.